She looked me dead in the eye on her birthday night in front of everyone I grew up with. Her glass raised, her lips curled into a smirk, and she said the words that shattered the air, "I'm cutting you out of the will." Gasps, whispers, the sound of knives against porcelain. They thought I'd beg, they thought I'd break. But I didn't. I leaned back, steady, my voice cutting cleaner than hers. That doesn't matter anymore, Mom, because I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel. It helps me keep telling the truth even when it hurts. My name is Lucian Vortex, and this is how I finally broke free. She hasn't said it yet, not in real time. Not in front of linen napkins and raised glasses, but her sentence already hangs in the room with me like a portrait I never chose to hang. I'm cutting you out of the will. I can hear myself answering the way my voice will land when it counts. That doesn't matter anymore, Mom, because the line sits on my tongue as the morning fans out over Wynwood. Sunlight hits the paint-spattered floor, and the small wall piece I'm finishing glows acid yellow against a field of storm blue. My phone buzzes. Answer. Izzy calls from the kitchen, pouring coffee. I do. Victoria's face fills the screen, perfect and controlled Greenwich lighting even at 10 a.m. The French Laundry. She says no greeting next weekend. My 65th. Your presence is required. I'll need you to prepare a brief remark, something gracious about family, about legacy. Keep it tasteful. She smiles, that curated smile, and glances to the side like she's checking off a task. Wear a proper suit, Lucian. The call clicks off before I can tell her I own one suit and it smells like sea air and spray paint. I keep painting until the yellow dries to a matte whisper. Serena Delgado pokes her head into the studio on her way to the gallery. You're close on that Community show, she says, eyes skimming my mood board photos of Allie's hand-lettered names of kids we've been mentoring, tape swatches of copper and neon pink. I like the direction. Keep your story up front. She squeezes my shoulder and is gone again, leaving the room humming with her two-sentence pep talk. At lunch, Izzy and I take the corner table at our usual cafe where the sidewalk smells like oranges and hot brick. I tell her about the call, about the required and the remark. She watches me over the rim of her coffee. You know she's not asking you to speak, Izzy says, voice soft but sharp. She's asking you to perform her version of you. She waits, then pins me with the question I've been avoiding. Do you want to tell your story at Napa, or let your mother tell it for you? I look past her at the graffiti across the street. Someone has layered a crown over a pair of praying hands, and realize I've been rehearsing the wrong speech my whole life. Back at the studio, the usual male sits on the workbench, invoices a postcard from a friend in New Orleans, a thick envelope with old-school blue type. Harper and Kober, Seattle. My name written in fountain pen black, not the sterile bulk mail machine font Greenwich prefers. Inside, a letter on creamy paper and a small brass key wrapped in tissue. The letter is from Leonard Ashwood, my mother's father, who's been gone 20 years, dated for when I turned 30. He writes in a steady hand about what we once discussed about the freedom of art, though we never discussed it, at least I don't remember we did. He references a storage unit outside Seattle and lists a contact at the firm for verification. He never mentions Victoria by name, and somehow that says everything. I set the key on my palm and feel its teeth. In my other hand, the envelope's postmark looks wrong. The letter is dated months ago. The stamp is from last week. Someone somewhere sat on it. The skin between my shoulder blades tightens. I pull the banker's box from under the drafting table. Inside, copies of account statements from the trust my father left me, the one Victoria oversees until you're responsible, darling. Spreadsheets line the pages in neat gray rows. I don't need the glasses I don't wear to notice the pattern. Regular management fees always routed through a Warwick Enterprises entity. Projects I never agreed to. Returns I never saw. The numbers move like a looped video I can't pause. I take photos, mark entries, and email Lydia Harper, an art attorney Serena trusts. An auto reply pings back, call accepted for late afternoon. By 4 o'clock, Lydia has heard the outline and is already organizing the bones. We'll start with verification, she says. Provenance chain of custody storage records. We proceed quietly until we're ready. Her voice is even an anchor. If the letter is what it appears to be, this isn't a windfall, it's an obligation. We treat it that way. I nod, pen tapping my knee. Izzy leans in the studio doorway as the day thins to gold, so she asks. I show her the key. Seattle first, I say. Before Napa. She exhales relief and resolve in one sound. Good. Take the right story with you. That night I book a flight to Seattle and another to San Francisco that will take me straight to Napa. I text Serena my travel dates and ask her to keep the studio lights on for me. I scroll to Evelyn's name. We don't text often. I type, going to Napa. Any advice? The dots dance, then stop, then dance again. Her message arrives in 3 bare words. Don't go empty-handed. I place the key next to the mood board and look at the photographs tacked there. Paint-streaked hands, a kid grinning under a mural he helped lift from sketch to brick. A shot of my father's old library in Greenwich that I've kept like a prayer. The French Laundry seems very far from all of this, and also too close. I tuck Leonard's letter back into its envelope and look again at the postmark, the quiet lie printed in ink. The date on the letter says one thing. The stamp says another. A message meant for me at 30 went wandering for months. Someone delayed it. The question lodges in my throat as the city goes blue outside my windows. Who kept my key out of my hand and why the house I grew up in didn't believe in secrets. It believed in displays. After my father died, the first room to change was his library. The doors stayed closed for a while, and when they opened, the shelves smelled like lemon oil and looked like a showroom. The art monographs and dog-eared sketchbooks were gone, replaced by a straight row of golf trophies and a coffee table book about mid-century chairs no one sat in. When I was 10, I learned grief could be polished until it clicked with the rest of the decor. At 12, I took to drawing in my bedroom. Small things at first, tags tucked into the backs of notebooks, letters that bent and fought and eventually found a rhythm I could hear. Victoria would sweep in, pinching 2 fingers to lift a sketch like it might stain. Mischief, she'd say, dismissing the page the way a hostess dismisses crumbs. Charles reinforced the new order with smiles that never touched his eyes. He called Ashton and Sienna the Warwick kids, and the phrase made me feel like my last name had been taped on crooked and was falling off. The first person who really saw me was Mr. Grayson, the art teacher, who kept Qley under his nails and hope in his pockets. He caught me redrawing a mural I'd seen in New Haven and said, "You have a way with negative space." Then he gave me an extra hour in the studio after school and didn't tell anyone. At 14, I painted a wall for a school event and won a small local prize. Victoria didn't come to the ceremony. There was a dinner in Manhattan that night and the family car left without me. I biked home with paint still on my hands and pressed my palms to the bathroom mirror, leaving 2 ghosts that took months to fade. I learned to do things quietly. At 17, I filled out applications to the University of Miami and UCLA after everyone was asleep, clicking submit with the sound turned off. The day the UM envelope came, I tucked it under my shirt and carried it around all afternoon, heat against my chest. That night at the walnut dining table, I laid the letter on the placemat next to my water glass and said I'd be heading south in August to study art history and urban design. I can still feel the air go thin. No, Victoria said too evenly. You'll go to Yale. You'll study something useful. Charles folded his napkin and offered a reasonable alternative that wasn't reasonable at all. We'll pay if you add business. Dual major. Management prepares you for real life. The line was a leash wrapped in satin. Real life, I repeated, and the phrase tasted like a mouthful of coins. We argued until the dessert plates went cold. I said I wanted to build something that breathed. She said control is how families survive. He smiled and said, compromise the way people say mercy when they mean surrender. In the end, I chose Miami and kept my yes to their offer in my pocket like a decoy. I worked a late shift in a cafe that summer and sold the steel watch they'd given me for my 16th birthday to cover deposits. The jeweler slid the watch into a tray without looking at me. It felt like handing over a version of myself that never fit. On my last night in that house, Victoria knocked on my door with a folder. "These are standard," she said, tapping the manila like it was harmless. "Scholarship documentation, routine, financial management until you're 21. You'll thank me later." I signed where she indicated because you sign things at home. In the hall, Evelyn stepped out of the guest room and watched me slide the pen back into the folder. "Keep copies of everything you sign," she said very quietly, like a person slipping you a map in a country where maps are illegal. When I reached Miami, the world widened fast. Wynwood was a patchwork of color and heat, and people who didn't need a gate code to decide who belonged. The classes I took for business tasted like cardboard. The ones for art tasted like rain after months of drought. Mr. Grayson's voice lived in my head when I needed it. "Freedom is a blank wall waiting for you to paint it." I taped the sentence on a cheap corkboard above my desk and underlined "wall." Years move like a mural, layers on layers, until the picture becomes itself. This afternoon, hunched over my studio table with copies of statements spread like playing cards, I find the line that bends the picture back to its first sketch. The form I signed at 18, filed away and forgotten under 4 moves, and 1,000 small decisions wasn't scholarship paperwork. Lydia walks me through the language as we screen share. The legalese clears like fog under sun. It's a limited power of attorney restricted in just the right ways to let management fees drip off the trust into Warwick projects without my permission, month after month, year after year. My father's money breathing into someone else's lungs. My initials sit neat at the bottom of the page, younger than I feel now, believing home meant safe. I print the form and lay it next to Leonard's letter. The 2 pages don't belong to the same story, but they rhyme. One is a door I didn't know I opened. The other is a door I almost didn't get to open at all. I think of Evelyn in the hall of her eyes, on the pen in my hand, of the sentence she delivered like a lifeline. I think of my father's library, of the books that disappeared and the trophies that marched in to take their place. Control has always looked like order in our family. Order has always been the mask. The night presses against the windows. The flight confirmation to Seattle pings my inbox. Napa waits on the other side like a stage set, perfect light, perfect flowers, perfect lines delivered in the perfect order. I run my thumb over the brass key again and picture a concrete corridor, a door that turns on this exact shape. The past tried to close its hand around both of these pages. It held one back for months. It dressed the other up as help. I stack them anyway, slide them into my bag, and zip the teeth together. When I stand, paint dust lifts off my jeans in a powdery cloud. Tomorrow I'll be in the air. Soon after, I'll be in the room where she finally says the sentence out loud. And when she does, I'll be ready to finish mine. The rain in Seattle felt different from Miami. It wasn't wild or sudden. It was constant, thin, a curtain that turned the whole sky into a shade of gray I could taste. The cab dropped me off in an industrial district outside the city, rows of anonymous warehouses pressed together like books with no titles. The driver asked if I was sure. I told him yes, then stepped into the damp air with the brass key in my hand. The office at the entrance was sterile plastic chairs, a humming heater, a manager scrolling through a tablet. I gave her the envelope from Harper & Co., and after scanning my ID, she slid a clipboard toward me. "Unit 27B, she said, eyes flicking to the screen again. "Records say it hasn't been opened in decades." She stamped the paper, and I felt the weight of the years land on my chest. Inside, the hallways echoed with the buzz of the dehumidifiers. Each door looked the same until I reached the one with an extra padlock. The brass key turned smoothly as though it had been waiting for this exact hand. The smell inside was sharp old wood varnish, something like dust, but heavier. Rows of metal shelves stretched out, stacked with crates stamped with years: 1958, 1962, 1973. My grandfather's handwriting was still visible in black ink along the edges. I pried open the first crate. Inside, layered in tissue and brown paper, was a sketch, a rough but alive composition from the early years of a pop artist whose work now hangs in every major museum. My pulse quickened. The crate came with a typed inventory slip, faded but legible, complete with a provisional appraisal that already made my head spin. The second crate was heavier. When the lid came off, the color bled into the room. An abstract canvas taller than me, strokes of red and black slashed like a storm. The provenance documents lay carefully sealed in a folder signed by galleries I knew well. The estimated value $15 million. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I stepped into the corner and called Lydia Harper. Her voice carried through the static like a lifeline. I told her what I had found, read parts of Leonard's letter, and described the inventory. She confirmed what the supplemental clause in the will had promised: the collection belonged to Leonard's grandchildren, excluding Victoria, citing irreconcilable differences in values. Lydia's tone shifted from professional to urgent. Photograph everything, catalog it. We'll begin the legal chain immediately. Don't alert anyone outside your circle. I spent hours photographing, labeling, creating a rough digital list. When I closed the last crate, I noticed a file folder wedged against the lid. Inside was a DVD in a thin paper sleeve. My hands shook as I slid it into the portable player the manager had let me borrow. The screen lit up with Leonard's face, older than I remembered, his voice gravelly but clear. If you're watching this, then you've turned 30. You know who I couldn't trust. Don't let Victoria sell your future. This belongs to you and to those who will come after you. The words struck like a hammer and a bomb all at once. Back in the office, while signing the exit log, I noticed something wrong. The digital entry book showed another access 10 days earlier, logged under a contractor's ID tied to a logistics firm I recognized. Warwick Enterprises had used that same firm for years. I asked about the visitor. The manager frowned, pulled up the security feed. The recording showed a tall figure in a baseball cap and gloves entering 27B, staying inside for nearly 20 minutes, then leaving without crates but with a clipboard tucked under his arm. I felt my jaw tighten. Someone in Victoria's orbit had already sniffed around. I signed the papers, trying not to betray the panic climbing my throat. Before leaving, I checked the drawers of the front desk. The manager handed me a plastic card she'd found abandoned in the lost and found box. A contractor's access card expired. I pocketed it, another breadcrumb that pointed toward my mother's world. By the time I left the warehouse, night had sunk over Seattle. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message: no sender ID, Napa will be the finale, don't be late. The letters glowed against the dark, and I felt the city close in. The key had opened more than a door. It had opened a clock that was already ticking. I walked out into the rain, knowing I could not go back. The crates would be transferred quietly to a facility in Miami under the name of a shell company I had just registered. Napa loomed ahead like a stage set, and now I carried a script no one else knew I had. Charleston's air was thick with summer heat, the kind that clung to your collar and made every church bell sound older than it was. Izzy and I arrived at the small stone chapel where my cousin Miles was getting married, and for once, a family gathering didn't feel like a trap. At least not at first. The buildings along the street wore their history: proudly iron balconies, chipped pastel paint flowers overflowing from clay pots. It was a place built for warmth, not control. Inside, relatives I hadn't seen in years greeted me with smiles that felt genuine. More than one of them called me Nathaniel's boy, their voices softening around my father's name. It startled me how different it felt to be seen as his son, not as a Sterling. For a moment, I let myself stand in that recognition. During the reception, Evelyn found me on the terrace overlooking the square. She leaned on her cane, her silver hair catching the last light of the day. "Your father worried," she said, low enough that no one else could hear. "He told me once that Victoria would use money like chains if she could. He left some papers with Leonard, insurance of a sort." Her eyes lingered on mine, searching for something. "Do you know what you're walking into at Napa?" I told her I was beginning to. The photographer corralled us soon after for a family picture. Ashton stood beside me, his arm too close, his cologne sharp. When the shutter clicked, he nudged me just enough that I slipped to the edge of the frame. "Careful, brother," he whispered, lips barely moving. "You'll get cropped out entirely soon." On the other side, Sienna smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Mother has something special planned for Napa," she said, like a secret too sweet to keep. Later, in the corner of the reception hall, I overheard Charles speaking with one of the board members of the Sterling Foundation. His tone was smooth, practiced. "Don't worry. By the time Napa is over, Nathaniel's old records will be clean. We can't afford loose threads." The words lodged like ice in my chest. As the evening wore on, Ashton approached again, glass in hand. "Funny thing," he said casually. "I've been offered an investment opportunity in art, modern undervalued works with sky-high upside. Guess who's behind it? Our family. We're diversifying." He grinned like a wolf. I forced a smile, but inside recognized the plan. If they gained control of Leonard's collection, they'd launder it as a portfolio, turning his legacy into another Warwick asset. Evelyn joined me again before the night ended. Around her neck hung a silver chain with a tiny key nearly identical to the one Leonard had sent me. She touched it lightly. "There's more than one door," she whispered. "But I can't hand this over until I know you'll stand your ground. Not just for yourself, for the truth." As the music swelled, the photographer handed me a print of the family photo. I stared at it, Ashton and Sienna radiant in the center. Victoria poised beside Charles and me, blurred at the far edge, half a shoulder and a sliver of my face visible. Proof of what I'd always been to them, present but peripheral. Before leaving, Evelyn folded a napkin on the table and slid it across to me. In her careful handwriting, one sentence stretched across the linen: "Napa will be the stage. Bring your story." I folded the napkin, slipped it into my vest pocket, and patted it once like a vow. Charleston's streets glowed with lantern light as Izzy and I walked back to the hotel. My cousin's laughter echoed down the block, but in my chest another sound was louder, the hum of a clock counting down. Napa was waiting, and I was running out of time to choose whether I'd walk in as the son they tried to erase, or the man who finally told the story out loud. Miami's summer had its own rhythm, hot and pulsing, the air carrying salt and exhaust in equal measure. Back in my Wynwood studio, I couldn't shake the sense that someone was breathing down my neck. The crates from Seattle were safely transferred to a storage facility under the anonymous LLC, but I knew eyes were following. The brass key rested on my desk beside Leonard's letter, yet instead of feeling like freedom, it pulsed like a target. At Lydia Harper's office downtown, the walls lined with neat shelves of legal volumes, she walked me through the numbers again. 80 million conservatively, she said, tapping the valuation papers. Some of these canvases could appreciate even more. But listen to me, this isn't something you parade around until it's airtight. You need absolute silence until every piece is secured, every document authenticated. Her tone was clipped protective. I nodded, though part of me itched to bring the truth into the light. Izzy leaned closer to me on the ride back, her hand resting over mine. "You can't hide forever, Lucian," she murmured. "That's how they've kept control all these years. Secrets only work for them if you keep playing along." Her words burrowed under my skin, stoking the question I couldn't shake: was I protecting the legacy, or was I letting their fear keep me small? That night, when I stepped onto the balcony of our apartment, a black SUV sat idling across the street. No headlights, no plates I could see. It had been there the past 3 evenings. My phone buzzed with another blocked call that cut off after one ring. I closed the curtains and tried to paint, but every brushstroke felt like a set of eyes. Serena Delgado arrived 2 days later, her heels clicking against the studio floor. She was sharper than usual, carrying the scent of espresso and urgency. "Journalists are circling," she told me. "Someone is leaking that you're connected to a massive private collection. If they print before you're ready, it'll be open season." I clenched my fists, anger rising because only one group had something to gain from dragging me out before I could stand. The next morning, I opened the mailbox outside and found a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, me stepping out of the warehouse in Seattle, the brass key glinting in my hand. My blood went cold. Whoever had sent this wanted me to know I was marked. I hurried back inside, grabbed the USB with Leonard's video, and drove to Lydia's office. She examined the device, brow furrowing. "It's been cloned," she said flatly. "Someone accessed the file remotely, probably when you synced it to your laptop. The original is still intact, but it's compromised. If they release it, they could cut and edit however they want." The idea of Leonard's voice manipulated into something false made bile rise in my throat. Back at the apartment, my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "If you speak in Napa, we'll speak too." No signature, no context, but the threat dripped from every pixel. Izzy read it over my shoulder, her jaw tightening. They're trying to scare you quiet. Don't give them the satisfaction. As if the universe wanted to drive the point home, Evelyn's letter arrived by courier that evening. Inside was a copy of a contract dated 2001, Victoria's signature at the bottom, a bold red line drawn through it. The contract was an attempted sale of one of Leonard's early acquisitions, illegal since it wasn't hers to sell. Leonard himself had intervened and scrawled void across the top. Evelyn's note read simply, "She tried once before. She'll try again. Don't let her." I sat in my studio that night, the city's neon bleeding through the window, staring at my half-finished mural. The photograph of me in Seattle, the contract from 2001, the compromised USB, they formed a web I couldn't escape. I lifted the spray can, painted one jagged black line across the wall, and whispered to myself, if I reveal this, will I lose Izzy, my freedom, everything I've built? Or is telling the truth the only way I'll ever really be free? Napa smelled of polished wood and lavender, a world away from Miami's sweat and spray paint. The French Laundry's pristine grounds stretched like a movie set, and every vine seemed trained into obedience. Izzy and I checked into a boutique hotel nearby, its rooms dressed in soft linens and curated furniture. The calm felt staged, a silence too perfect before the music strikes. That afternoon, Evelyn met me outside the local bank, her silver hair shining in the late sun. She pressed a second key into my palm, smaller than Leonard's brass one, but no less heavy. Inside the bank vault, she guided me to a safety deposit box. I turned the lock, and there it was, a letter in Leonard's unmistakable handwriting, along with the fountain pen he'd used for years. The paper smelled faintly of cedar. To Lucian, the keeper of the fire. You understand that art is not possession but promise. Guard it from those who would strip it of soul. It is yours because you know it can never truly be owned. I closed my eyes, clutching the letter as if Leonard had reached through time to steady me. When I stepped outside, Ashton was leaning against a lamppost, sunglasses perched despite the fading light. "Mother's ready," he said smoothly. "She's been rehearsing this moment for months. Tomorrow she buries you in front of everyone." He pushed off the post, smirk curling, and walked away without another word. My pulse hammered, but I stood straighter because I could feel Leonard's letter against my chest. Back at the hotel, Izzy paced while I laid documents across the desk. "You're carrying enough evidence to collapse their whole empire," she said. "But Lucien, don't forget. The truth is stronger than silence. That's the only way you win." Her words lingered even after she fell asleep beside me, the glow of the vineyard lights slipping through the curtains. Sometime past midnight, I heard a faint rustle. A white envelope slid under the hotel room door. Inside was a packet of financial statements from my father's trust, stamped in red forgery. The implication was clear: someone was preparing to accuse me of fabricating the very proof I'd uncovered. My chest tightened with fury and dread. Later, Evelyn returned to the hotel lounge, her face shadowed. She told me quietly that years ago, Victoria had cornered her, demanding she sign a false declaration that Leonard had intended Victoria to manage the collection. Evelyn had refused, and Leonard had cut Victoria out entirely. "She'll lie again if she must," Evelyn said. "She always has." Dinner with the immediate family was staged the night before the main event. Sienna's words cut through the polished courses like shards of glass. "Enjoy tonight, Lucian," she said, smiling as if she were offering dessert. "Tomorrow will be the last time you sit at this table as a Sterling." No one corrected her, not even Charles. When Izzy and I returned upstairs, I reached for my bag, intending to review Leonard's video one more time. The USB was gone. My breath stopped. I tore through every pocket, every drawer. Nothing. Someone had slipped into our room. The most vital piece of proof, the voice of my grandfather himself, had been stolen on the eve of battle. I stood at the window, Napa Valley glittering beneath me, lanterns flickering across the rows of vines. Tomorrow the table would be set, the wine poured, the performance staged. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, I either lose everything, or I become the one to tell the story the right way." The night air pressed against me like a challenge, and I knew there was no turning back. The French laundry was dressed like a cathedral of power. Chandeliers burned steady orchids cascaded from vases, white satin stretched taut across tables that gleamed with crystal and silver. Guests murmured in choreographed tones, board members of the Sterling Foundation, business allies, distant cousins dressed like shareholders. When Izzy and I stepped through the doorway, heads turned. I felt the air shift like I had walked into a courtroom already waiting for a verdict. Victoria glided toward us, radiant in emerald silk, her smile practiced to the edge of cruelty. "Darling," she said, brushing a kiss across my cheek that didn't touch skin. "I'm so pleased you made the effort." Ashton clinked his glass against mine in mock celebration, his eyes daring me to falter. Sienna offered a cool nod, her gaze already dismissing me. Charles hovered nearby, polished, unreadable. Dinner unfolded with rehearsed charm. Wine flowed, speeches sparkled, but beneath it all there was tension, as though the air itself was waiting for a cue. My plate emptied untouched. Izzy's hand found mine under the table, grounding me. Then Victoria rose. The room fell silent. Her voice, velvet-edged, rang out. "Thank you all for being here on this milestone evening. Tonight is about gratitude, and yet gratitude demands honesty." She paused, let her eyes sweep the room before fixing them on me. "Lucien has chosen a life apart from this family, a life detached from responsibility. As such, I've made the painful but necessary decision. I am cutting him out of my will." Gasps rippled down the table. Ashton leaned back, triumphant. Sienna smirked like a judge sealing a sentence. Victoria's chin lifted higher, as if daring me to crumble in front of them all. I stood slowly. The hush deepened. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "That doesn't matter anymore, Mom, because..." I reached into my bag and laid a glossy photograph on the table. A pop art canvas, vibrant and unmistakable, worth $15 million. Papers followed the valuation, provenance, notarized affidavits from Lydia Harper's office. "Because the legacy you thought you controlled never belonged to you. It belonged to Leonard Ashwood, and he made his wishes clear." Murmurs surged. Victoria's smile flickered. Charles leaned forward, lips pressed tight. I raised a small device. The screen lit up with Leonard's face, his voice steady even after 20 years in the grave. "This collection belongs to my grandchildren. Victoria is excluded for reasons she already knows. It is their heritage, not her commodity." Evelyn rose then, voice clear and unwavering. "That is his handwriting. That is his will." Charles snapped, "Forgery. Manipulation. Do not be fooled." But before his protest could spread, I unfolded another document stamped with the seal of a Miami museum that had authenticated the works independently. Gasps turned to whispers. Two guests pushed back their chairs and left, murmuring about reputations tarnished, about the Foundation's credibility sinking if this continued. Victoria's mask, cracked eyes, narrowing lips, trembling with fury she couldn't cloak. I met her gaze. "The inheritance you hold over us like a leash, it isn't yours. Leonard entrusted us with more than wealth. He entrusted us with truth." My chest rose, breath steady. "Our heritage isn't for sale. It's for preservation." The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by the faint clink of a fork falling to porcelain. For the first time in years, she had no words. I ended simply, my voice echoing against the vaulted walls. "Our legacy is not meant to be sold off, but kept alive." And in that instant, I felt the weight of her control fracture. Months after Napa, the battle shifted from dining tables to courtrooms. Victoria and Charles fought to the end, but Leonard's video, his letters, and the sealed provenance left no doubt. The trust was validated, their claims dissolved. Sienna tried to stir public sympathy, casting Victoria as a victim, but Julianne's articles exposed the decades of manipulation. The sterling image cracked under the weight of truth. In Wynwood, we unveiled The Hidden Collector. Crowds filled the gallery, children staring wide-eyed at canvases once locked away. Miles, Ivy, Theo, and I stood as equals. Ashton arrived quietly, admitting he had been wrong, leaving the door open to something new. Victoria met me in a cafe, her tone stripped of command. I listened, but drew my line. I'll never live chained again. Evelyn later handed me my father's letter, his faith that I'd choose my own path. I dedicated part of the trust to scholarships for young artists, giving others the freedom I had fought for. Under neon light paint still on my hands, I knew true inheritance was not the money, but the right to live unbound.